The first piece of it was a single tax form for an account I had never heard of. It arrived in the mail in late January, the way these things do one ordinary envelope in the stack of ordinary envelopes that show up every year when it's time to do our taxes. And I always did our taxes. By hand, carefully, because I am the kind of person who finds it oddly satisfying the forms, the boxes, the quiet order of it all. So I almost filed this one without a second look. It was a 1099, the little form a bank sends to report the interest you earned, and it had my husband's name on it, and the name of a bank I didn't recognize, and an account number I had never seen in 15 years of doing our returns. It was nothing. A small thing. A single chip of ice floating on the surface of the water. I made a note to ask Aaron about it, and I moved on with my day. I had no idea I was looking at the very tip of something enormous and submerged a year-long plan, built carefully beneath the surface of my marriage by a man who had remembered to hide almost everything. Except the one thing he could not hide, that the woman whose name sits next to his on every tax return reads every single piece of paper that comes into this house. This is the story of the year I spent quietly watching an iceberg surface, one small wrong detail at a time, and what I had already built by the time my husband believed he was finally ready to leave. Before I go on, I want to ask you something, and I genuinely want your answer in the comments. Who handles the boring paperwork in your home, the taxes, the bills, the accounts, the renewals? Because in most couples, it's quietly one person, and that person sees everything, whether anyone realizes it or not. Are you that person? Or are you trusting that someone else is? Be honest, because this entire story turns on the fact that my husband forgot, for an entire year, who in our marriage actually reads the mail. Tell me in the comments who does it in yours. I read every single one. And I want to say one thing to the person watching who just realized, with a small jolt, that they are not the one who handles the money in their home, that they actually have no idea what accounts exist, what the passwords are, where the statements go. I'm not saying that to frighten you. I'm saying it because knowledge is not suspicion. You can love and trust your partner completely, and still know your own financial life, still be able to name your accounts, find your tax returns, understand where things stand. That isn't a betrayal of trust. It's basic adulthood, and it is yours by right. The goal is not to spy on anyone. The goal is to never be a stranger to your own life. Because the people who get hurt worst in these stories are almost always the ones who handed the whole map to someone else and stopped looking at it. Look at the map. It's yours too. Let me tell you who I am, because it matters. I am not an accountant. I have no special training. I am simply the person who, 15 years ago, took over our family's finances because Aaron found them boring and I found them calming. And I never gave it back. Every bill, every statement, every renewal, every tax form, it all flowed through me. I knew our money the way you know your own kitchen in the dark. And Aaron, over those 15 years, grew completely comfortable not thinking about any of it. Marion handles that, he'd say with a little wave, almost proud of how little he had to know. He had no idea he was handing me, year after year, a complete and total map of our financial life, and that I would one day need it to find my way out. I want to dwell on that phrase, because I think it's at the heart of how this happens in so many marriages. Marion handles that. It sounds like trust, doesn't it? And for years, that's what I thought it was. But somewhere along the way, trust quietly curdled into something else. A blind spot. Aaron didn't just delegate the finances to me. He stopped being able to see them at all. And here is the strange truth I've come to understand when you hand someone the boring, invisible work of your life. You are also handing them a kind of power. The power that comes from being the only one who actually knows how things work. For 15 years, Aaron treated that power like a chore he was glad to be rid of. He thought he was the one being served. He never once considered that the person holding the map is the person who can never truly be lost, and that the person who handed the map away had quietly made himself dependent on someone he was at that very moment planning to betray. So, back to the iceberg. The mystery 1099. I asked Aaron about it, lightly, over dinner, and he said, just as lightly, that it was an old account he'd forgotten about. Nothing important. He'd been meaning to close it. And I believed him, because why wouldn't I? One small chip of ice. You don't see an iceberg from one chip. You see a man who forgot about an old account. So I noted it, and I filed it, and I let it go. I think about that moment a lot now, the moment I chose to believe him. Because part of me wants to be angry at myself for it, for not seeing the whole iceberg from that very first chip. But I've made peace with it, and I'd want anyone watching to make peace with their own version too. You are not foolish for trusting the person you married. Trust is not a flaw. It's the floor a marriage stands on. The betrayal is not that I believed Aaron about an old, forgotten account. The betrayal is that he lied so smoothly, over dinner, looking right at me, about the first brick in a wall he was building to leave me. I did exactly what a loving spouse does. I gave him the benefit of the doubt. He did exactly what a betrayer does. He used my trust as the cover for his plan. If you've ever blamed yourself for not seeing it sooner, please hear this: the person who lied is responsible for the lie, not the person who, reasonably, believed someone they loved. But I am, by nature, a noticer. And a few weeks later, the second piece surfaced. It was an address, a change of address confirmation. The kind you get when you update where your mail goes, except I hadn't updated anything. And when I looked closely, it wasn't for our household. It was a notification that some of Aaron's financial mail was now being redirected to a P.O. box, a post office box. We had never in our lives had a P.O. box. Why would a married man who lived in a house with his wife need his bank statements sent to a private box that only he could open? 2 chips of ice now. And for the first time, a small cold feeling, because 2 chips don't sit on the water in quite the same innocent way one does. I didn't say anything this time. Some quiet instinct told me to simply watch. To keep doing exactly what I always did: the mail, the taxes, the careful order, and to pay very close attention. That instinct, I've since realized, was the most important thing I had, and I want to name what it actually was. Because it isn't paranoia, and it isn't magic. It's the quiet knowledge that comes from genuinely understanding your own life. I knew our finances so well, so deeply, that an anomaly registered the way a wrong note registers to someone who knows a song by heart. I couldn't have told you, that day, what the P.O. box meant. But I knew, the way you know your own handwriting, that it did not belong in the pattern of our life. That is the gift of being the one who handles the boring details. You develop a feel for normal so precise that the abnormal announces itself, even when you can't yet explain it. Most people miss the early signs of betrayal not because they're foolish, but because they never knew the baseline well enough to notice the deviation. I knew the baseline. I'd built it. And so the deviations, one by one, could not hide from me. If that cold feeling is familiar to you, that moment, when the second small thing makes the first small thing stop being nothing, do me one quick favor before I tell you what surfaced next. Tap like and subscribe to the channel. I'm not asking for nothing. These calm, slow-burn revenge stories get buried by the algorithm unless people actually engage. And your one tap is the only reason the next one reaches a woman who is, tonight, holding one small piece of paper that doesn't quite add up. And believe me, what was underneath the water is so much bigger than those first 2 chips. The third piece came that spring. Interest income on our actual joint records that was lower than it should have been, as if money had been quietly moving out of accounts I could see into accounts I couldn't. The fourth piece, a month later, a retirement account loan. He had borrowed against his retirement, a significant amount, and the paperwork had come to the house by accident. One envelope that slipped past the P.O. box. The fifth piece, travel. Mileage and charges on a card I monitored that placed Aaron in places his calendar said he'd never been. And here's the thing about an iceberg, the thing that makes it so much more frightening than a single wreck: you do not discover it all at once. You discover it the way I did, one cold piece at a time, over months, each one explainable on its own. Each one a little harder to explain alongside the others. Until one ordinary afternoon you stop, and you set all the pieces side by side on the kitchen table, and you finally see the shape of the enormous thing that has been underneath your marriage the entire time. I remember the afternoon I saw it whole. I had everything spread out in front of me: the mystery account, the P.O. box, the shrinking interest, the retirement loan, the impossible travel. And I stopped pretending each piece was separate. Because separately, they were a forgotten account and an errand and a coincidence. Together, they were a plan, a careful, patient, year-long plan to build a hidden financial life, to quietly move money where I couldn't see it, to set up a separate existence and, when it was all ready, to leave. My husband was not drifting. He was not being careless. He was executing a strategy, methodically, month by month, the way you'd plan a long trip. He'd been planning his exit for a year. And of course, underneath the money was the reason for the money. Her name was Stephanie. I'd find the confirmation of that soon enough, but by the time I did, I almost didn't need it, because the money had already told me everything. You don't build a hidden second financial life for no one. The accounts were the love letters. The P.O. box was the affair. The retirement loan was the future he was funding without me. I just happened to be fluent in the only language he'd written it all in. There's a particular grief in that fluency, and I want to be honest about it, because the cleverness of this story can make it sound like I sailed through coldly. I didn't. Reading your husband's betrayal in the language you're most fluent in is its own special kind of pain. Other people find out through a text, a lipstick stain, a friend's careful phone call. I found out through 1099s and account statements and the cold grammar of money, the very documents I'd spent 15 years tending with something like love, because keeping our family's finances in order had felt to me like a way of taking care of us. And now those same documents were telling me that while I was using money to care for our shared life, he was using it to build his separate one. The tools of my devotion became the evidence of his betrayal. I cried over spreadsheets. I don't expect anyone to understand that unless they've done it. But there's a strange dignity in it too, because the same fluency that broke my heart was the fluency that was about to save me. So now I had seen the iceberg. And I had a choice about what to do with the fact that I'd seen it. Here is what I did not do. I did not confront him. I did not lay the pages on the table and demand to know what they meant. Because in that moment, I understood the single most important fact of my entire situation. Aaron's whole year-long plan was built on one assumption: that no one was watching. That the money was moving in the dark. The instant he knew that I had been reading every page of his secret all along, the dark would turn on, and he would change everything, move the money again to places I truly couldn't follow. Get a lawyer, get careful, get fast. Right now, his greatest weakness was his confidence. He believed his plan was invisible, and I was not going to correct him. I was going to let him keep building his careful little exit in what he thought was darkness, while I quietly photographed every brick. I need to underline why this restraint was so much harder and so much more important than it sounds. Every day I stayed silent. I had to sit across from a man at breakfast knowing he was actively, that very week, working to leave me with as little as possible. I had to ask about his day and mean it convincingly. I had to watch him perform the role of an ordinary husband while I knew it was a performance, and perform my own role of an oblivious wife right back at him. It was exhausting in a way I find hard to describe, like holding your breath for months. But I understood, with total clarity. The math of it. Every single day I held my breath was a day his confidence grew and his carelessness grew with it. A day he added another documentable brick to a wall that would eventually be entered into evidence against him. My silence wasn't passivity. It was the most active thing I have ever done. I was working, every quiet day, by doing nothing he could see. So I did what I have always done. I kept the records. Except now, I kept them for me. Over the following weeks, calmly and without a single change in my behavior that he could notice, I assembled the most thorough financial portrait of my own marriage that has probably ever existed. Because I had something almost no betrayed spouse has, 15 years of complete records and the skill to read them. I didn't have to hire someone to reconstruct what Aaron was hiding. I was the person other people hire. Every tax form, every statement, every anomaly, I had it, or I knew exactly where to find it. The mystery account, traced. The P.O. box, noted. The retirement loan, documented. The money that had quietly drained from the joint accounts into his secret ones followed dollar by dollar, dated. Organized, undeniable, and then I took it all to a lawyer. She looked through what I brought her, and she was quiet for a long moment, and then she said 3 things I will never forget. The first, most people come to me suspecting their spouse is hiding money during a divorce. You've brought me a fully documented map of him hiding it before the divorce even started. Do you understand how rare this is? He's been preparing for a year. So have you. The difference is, he doesn't know that. The second, she explained that secretly moving and hiding marital money in preparation to leave is exactly the kind of thing that turns a divorce sharply in the wronged spouse's favor. And that because I could document the entire pattern. The hidden accounts would not stay hidden, and the money he'd squirreled away would be counted as exactly what it was: marital assets he'd tried to conceal. His year of careful hiding hadn't protected that money. It had built a case against him. She explained something to me in that meeting that I think everyone should understand, married or not. She said that there's a crucial difference, in the eyes of the law, between a divorce where assets are simply divided and a divorce where one spouse has been caught actively, deliberately hiding assets in bad faith. The first is just arithmetic. The second is a credibility problem, and credibility in a legal proceeding is everything. Once we show the court that he spent a year secretly concealing marital money, she said, every single thing he says afterward gets weighed differently. He's no longer a husband who grew apart from his wife. He's a man who has demonstrated in documents that he will deceive to get what he wants. And no judge divides assets generously in favor of the person who tried to hide them. Aaron had spent a year believing his secrecy was making him safer. It was doing the exact opposite. Every hidden account was another nail, and he was the one holding the hammer. And the third thing she said, quietly, she said, don't tip him off. Let him finish his plan. Let him think he's ready. Let him be the one to make the first move, confident and unprepared, while you sit on a complete file he doesn't know exists. The most powerful position in a divorce is to be completely ready, while the other person thinks you know nothing at all. So that is exactly what I did. I waited. And it was the strangest, quietest few months of my life, going about my days, doing the mail, doing the taxes, making dinner. While sitting on the complete blueprint of my husband's secret exit, watching him add to it brick by brick, both of us preparing for the same ending, only one of us aware there were two players. Those months taught me something about patience that I carry with me still. We live in a world that tells us the strong response is the immediate one: confront, expose, blow it all up the moment you know. But there is a deeper kind of strength that almost no one talks about, and it is the strength to wait when waiting serves you. To hold a devastating truth quietly, not because you're afraid to use it, but because you understand that its power multiplies the longer you let it ripen. Every week I waited, my position got stronger and his got weaker, and he had no idea the clock was even running. I wasn't enduring those months. I was using them. There is a profound difference between suffering in silence and strategizing in silence. And the difference is entirely in whether you've decided that the silence is yours. I had decided. The silence was mine. And in it, very quietly, I was winning. There was a moment, near the end, when he almost saw it. He came into the kitchen while I had a single statement out, one I'd printed to add to my file, and he glanced at it, and for one icy second I thought it was over. But it was an ordinary joint statement, the kind I'd have out anyway, doing what I always did. He didn't give it a second look. The man had spent a year hiding an entire financial life from me and never once considered that the woman calmly paying the bills at the kitchen table was building a case that would end him. Why would he? He'd stopped seeing me as someone who noticed things a long time ago. That blindness was the whole reason his plan failed. I have thought a great deal about that blindness, because it's the real engine of this entire story, more than any document. Aaron's fatal mistake was not the P.O. box or the sloppy retirement loan. His fatal mistake was a slow, years-long erasure of me from his mental picture of his own life. At some point, he stopped seeing me as a full person, as someone with eyes, with skills, with the capacity to notice and to act, and started seeing me as a kind of household function, the thing that made the bills disappear and the taxes get done. And you cannot plan around a person you've stopped seeing. He defended his secret from banks, from the mail, from anyone he considered a real player. He never defended it from me, because in his mind I wasn't a player at all. I was furniture that did arithmetic. The most expensive thing he ever did was underestimate the quiet woman at the kitchen table, and he did it so completely that he handed her every single day the exact evidence she'd use to undo him. Then, finally, after a year of building, Aaron made his move. He came home one evening and he was calm and rehearsed and almost gentle. And he told me he wanted a divorce. He had clearly practiced. He talked about growing apart, about how it was nobody's fault, about how he wanted to keep things simple and amicable. And underneath the gentle words, I could hear the confidence of a man who believed he had spent a year quietly arranging the board so that simple and amicable would mean he walked away with everything he'd hidden. And I walked away with only what he'd left in plain sight. I let him finish. And then I slid a folder across the table. Inside was the iceberg. All of it. The mystery account from that first January. The P.O. box. The shrinking interest. The retirement loan. The traced money, dollar by dollar, from the joint accounts into the hidden ones. The whole year-long plan, documented in more detail than Aaron himself could have produced. Because I had been reading every page of it as he wrote it. I watched my husband's rehearsed calm collapse in real time. I watched him understand that the simple, amicable divorce he'd spent a year engineering was built on the assumption that I couldn't see his money, and that the assumption had been wrong from the very first 1099, 14 months ago. I watched the planner realize he'd carried out his entire secret operation in front of the one person who reads everything. His face did something I'll never forget. It went through a year of memories in about 10 seconds. Every dinner where he'd thought he was being so careful. Every brick he'd thought he'd laid in darkness. All of it relit, all at once. With the horrible new knowledge that the lights had been on the whole time, and I'd been standing in the doorway, watching, taking notes, saying nothing. I didn't raise my voice. I said the only sentence I had prepared. I said, "Aaron, you planned this for a year. You just forgot that I'm the one who does the taxes." The divorce was not simple, and it was not amicable. But it was far fairer to me than the version Aaron had spent a year building. The hidden money came back into the light and was counted. The accounts he thought were invisible were divided like the marital assets they were. His careful exit, the one he'd been so proud of, became the clearest possible evidence of bad faith hiding. And it cost him accordingly. I walked away with my fair share of everything, including the half of those secret accounts that had always, legally, been mine. Stephanie, I heard, was less enchanted with Aaron once his carefully funded fresh start turned into a divorce where the wife had documented every dollar. There's not much romance in a secret nest egg that turns out to have been counted, dated, and divided by the woman it was hidden from. What I remember most about the months after isn't the settlement, though. It's the slow return of something I hadn't realized I'd lost, the simple, grounding pleasure of taking care of my own life. For myself, in the light. I still do my own taxes. I still find the forms and the boxes oddly satisfying. But now there's no second life hiding behind the numbers. No iceberg under the surface. Nothing submerged. Every account is one I opened. Every dollar is one I can see. And there is a peace in that, a deep, quiet, unglamorous peace that I would not trade for anything. For years I'd handled our money believing I was caring for a shared life. It turned out I was only ever caring for myself and a man building his exit. Now I care for myself on purpose, openly, with no one writing secret chapters underneath. It is, honestly, a relief. And if you'll let me leave you with one thing, not as someone who got revenge, but as a woman who watched her marriage quietly dismantled for a year before the man doing it ever said a word, it's this. Pay attention to the small, boring details of your own life. The single odd form. The address that changed. The number that's a little lower than it should be. Betrayal almost never announces itself. It surfaces, one small, cold piece at a time. And the people who catch it are simply the ones who keep noticing instead of explaining everything away. And know your own finances not out of suspicion, but because the person who understands the money is never powerless, no matter what anyone tells them. The people who truly love you are not building a secret life beneath the one you share, the ones who have left a paper trail. You only have to be the kind of person who reads it. There's one more thing, though, after the divorce. While finally closing out that very first mystery account, I discovered that it had not been opened the year Aaron started planning his exit. It had been opened years earlier, which meant the plan, and possibly everything underneath it, had begun far longer ago than I'd ever realized, and pointed to a secret that predated the marriage I thought I knew. What I uncovered about how long this had really been going on, and what I did once I understood it, is a story entirely its own. And it might just be the most satisfying one yet. It's right there on your screen. You are going to want to see how that one ends.